I entered that church convinced that I was defending the Bible. I left on my knees crying, without arguments, without pride, without ground. If you think you have all the answers, listen until the end. I thought so too. My name is Bruno Almeida. I am 41 years old. What I am about to tell is not theory, not debate, not opinion. It is testimony. And it began on the day I decided to prove in front of everyone that the Eucharist was just bread. I grew up in Campinas, in the interior of São Paulo, Brazil. I was raised in an evangelical church from the cradle. I learned to read with the Bible open on the table. I learned to pray before I learned to say sorry. My world was simple and clear. We were right, the others were wrong. Catholicism to me was sophisticated idolatry. I didn't hate people, I said. I hated the error. At least, that's what I repeated to myself. Over time, I stopped just believing. I began to lead men, lead speeches, lead confrontations. I spoke with conviction, with authority, with fire in my eyes. People listened to me, respected me, and I felt chosen. The more I attacked what I called heresy, the stronger I felt spiritually. The problem is that no one realizes when faith turns into a weapon. I didn't realize it either. Everything changed when I discovered what Catholics actually believe about the Eucharist. Not a caricature, not an exaggeration. The literal belief that Jesus is there, present, alive. That revolted me, not just theologically, personally. Something inside me decided that this needed to be unmasked, not with words, with a public definitive act impossible to ignore. That's how I gathered 8 men: Carlos Eduardo, Paulo Henrique, Rodrigo Lima, Enrique Farias, Victor Moreira, Leonardo Guedes, Gustavo Teixeira, and Mateus Barros, each carrying their own wound, their own anger, their own certainty. We planned everything carefully, the day, the place, the exact moment. I believed we would come out victorious, proving that nothing would happen. Before I continue, write in the comments where you are watching from and tell me what time it is there. Now I want to know how far this testimony will reach. While you're at it, leave your like and subscribe to the channel, because what happened next not only destroyed my plan, it destroyed who I thought I was, and presented me with a truth from which I could never escape. My faith wasn't born aggressive, it was shaped that way. I grew up hearing that loving the truth required confrontation, that tolerance was disguised weakness, and that God was pleased with those who didn't back down an inch. Within the church where I was raised, I learned early on that there were 2 very well-defined sides, those who were right and those who were lost. And no one taught us to listen to the lost, only to correct them. As a teenager, I began to take on responsibilities. I led groups, organized evangelisms, studied the Bible diligently. People said I had a calling, that my voice convinced, that I wasn't afraid. That fed something dangerous inside me, absolute certainty. And when someone has absolute certainty, they stop examining themselves. I didn't realize it, but my faith was no longer making me humble. It was making me hard. As the years went by, my discourse became sharper. I started using verses as weapons. I spoke of idolatry with disdain, not with pain. I said I was saving souls, but I felt satisfaction when I won discussions. The error of others made me feel better about myself, and whenever a small doubt arose, I suppressed it with more activity, more words, more spiritual noise. I remember an episode that today never leaves my mind. I was preaching in a square when an elderly lady approached. She didn't argue, didn't shout. She just asked for respect. She said she prayed for me. That deeply disturbed me. Not because she was wrong, but because there was something in her eyes that didn't match the image of an enemy I had created. I went home that night restless, and I did what I always did when something threatened my conviction. I prayed, asking God to harden my heart. It was in that terrain that the idea began to grow. It didn't come as madness, but as a mission. When I discovered what the Catholic Church taught about the Eucharist, I felt real indignation, not academic, physical. It was as if something had been personally directed against everything I believed. It was no longer enough to disagree. I needed to expose. I needed to prove in front of everyone that it had no power at all. Unbeknownst to me, I stopped wanting to defend God and started wanting to win. And when faith becomes a dispute, love has long been left behind. At that point in my life, I was no longer seeking the truth. I wanted to confirm what I had already decided to believe. And it was with this closed heart that I began to gather the men who would enter that church with me. I didn't choose those men by chance. Each of them carried a story similar to mine, although marked by different pains. Carlos Eduardo had been raised in a home divided between two religions and had learned early on to distrust Catholicism. Paulo Henrique lost his father amid a family fight that started because of faith. Rodrigo Lima harbored an old anger that never healed. Enrique Farias, Victor Morera, Leonardo Guerres, Gustavo Teixeira, and Mateos Barros brought frustrations, rejections, spiritual disappointments. None of us were neutral. We were all wounded, and an unhealed wound becomes fuel. We began to meet at night, always after work. We spoke softly, like those who know they are doing something big. We spread papers across the table, schedules, maps, notes. The plan was not vandalism, at least not in our minds. We called it a prophetic act, something that would expose a lie before everyone's eyes. We studied masses, learned the right moments, defined positions. Every detail seemed to confirm that we were right. When everything fits together, no one suspects they are wrong. We also prayed together. We fasted. We asked for courage. We asked for protection. We asked God to use us. Today, that scares me more than anything else. We truly believed He approved of it. The silence we received in response was interpreted as agreement, never as a warning. We chose a large traditional church, always full. The day was symbolic, the exact time. We didn't want confusion before the moment. We wanted to act at the moment when, according to them, the bread became something more. The idea was simple: take, leave, and show the world that nothing would happen. No fire from heaven. No punishment, no divine reaction, just silence. And we believed that this silence would be our victory. The night before, I hardly slept. I reviewed the plan dozens of times. I thought about the repercussions, the discussions, the videos, the headlines. I felt important, convinced that I was about to do something historic, something that would put an end to an old lie. At no point did I ask myself if I was ready to deal with the opposite. That morning, as I left home, I felt a strange tightness in my chest. I ignored it. Fear didn't fit with conviction. I met the others. 9 men, silent, tense, determined. None of us knew that within a few hours everything we believed about God, faith and control, would be dismantled before our eyes, and that the silence we expected would be replaced by something we would never be able to forget. We entered the church separately, as agreed. The atmosphere was calm, almost too serene for what we carried inside. The air was fresh, smelling of wax and incense. The light streamed through the stained glass and colored the ancient floor. Everything seemed carefully prepared for silence and reverence. That bothered me. It didn't match the idea of deception I had in my head. I sat several rows back, trying to look just like everyone else. I watched people arrive, whole families, elderly people with slow steps, restless children. A lady sat down next to me, smiled, and wished me a good day. I returned the gesture out of politeness, but averted my gaze. I didn't want to create bonds. It was easier when others remained anonymous. The celebration began on time, soft hymns, responses in unison, gestures repeated naturally. I observed everything as one analyzes a performance. Every word, every movement I judged internally. Until the moment I had been waiting for arrived, the consecration. Silence spread through the church like a mantle. People knelt almost simultaneously. The sound of the pews moving ceased. Only the air conditioning and the held breath of hundreds of people remained. I remained standing, not out of distraction, but out of defiance. I stared fixedly at the altar, at that small piece of bread elevated with care. Inside me, everything screamed that it was absurd. But strangely, my body began to react differently. A weight descended upon my chest. It wasn't pain, it was pressure. I took a deep breath. It didn't pass. My hands began to tremble slightly. I attributed it to nervousness. It was now. When communion began, I exchanged a quick glance with Paulo Henrique. It was the signal. I stood up and moved through the side pews. The sound of my footsteps echoed too loudly. I hurried up the altar steps. I saw the priest with his back turned, focused, calmly distributing communion. I extended my hands and held the golden vessel tightly. The moment I pulled, everything seemed to slow down. It was then that I realized I couldn't move. My body did not respond, not out of fear, but something stronger, reverence. The other men were like me, some on their knees, others with their hands on their faces, others crying silently. All the plans, all the certainty, all the rehearsed courage, none of it existed anymore. Above the altar, the presence became clear. It did not come with noise. It did not break the space. It simply revealed itself. A woman enveloped in light, with a cloak that seemed to move without wind, a soft veil, a serene and profoundly sad face. There was no accusation in that gaze. There was pain. A mother's pain, pain that penetrates, that strips bare, that needs no words to be understood. And yet she spoke, not with sound, but directly within me, as if each thought was illuminated at once. Why did you hurt my son? The question did not come as judgment, it came as lament. And there, for the first time, I understood what I had done. I did not confront a lie. I attacked a love that was being offered. My knees touched the cold ground, not by choice, not by decision. I simply fell. I cried like I had never cried before. A cry that came from a place deeper than emotion. A cry from someone who finally sees their own spiritual nakedness. I tried to speak. I couldn't. No justification could survive in that environment. The presence approached. I felt a hand on my head. Warm, real, a touch that did not condemn, but restored. And then came the phrase that shattered what was left of my pride. You have already been forgiven. There was no condition. There was no threat, just truth. The forgiveness already existed before the error. We just had never accepted it. Around me, I saw people crying, praying, kneeling. The priest was on the ground with his hands together, tears flowing uncontrollably. The light began to dim slowly. The presence carefully gathered each fallen host, one by one, with a gesture of love that hurt from its beauty. Before disappearing, she looked at us again, and that certainty engraved itself in me. I would never be able to deny what I had seen. The light disappeared, but nothing returned to normal. The church was silent, as if time had stopped to give us space. We remained on the ground for long minutes, perhaps more. No one was in a hurry to stand up. No one spoke loudly. When I finally raised my face, I saw people looking at us not with anger, but with something I did not expect, compassion. The priest approached slowly, helped me to my feet, and embraced me. He asked nothing. He demanded no explanations. He simply welcomed me. That disarmed what remained of my defense. Shortly after, authorities arrived. There were questions, reports, witnesses, but there was no accusation. There was understanding. We left there not as victors or victims, but as broken men who had found something greater than any speech. Still that afternoon, we sat in a simple room and began to talk. It was not a lesson. It was listening. It was silence. It was a beginning. The following days were tough. Phones rang, doors closed. Friends distanced themselves. Harsh words were spoken. I lost space, lost respect, lost security. Some of the men lost jobs. Others lost family. I myself was called a traitor, deceived, apostate. All of that hurt. A lot. But strangely, there was no regret. There was peace. A peace that did not depend on approval. Over time, we began to learn, to pray, to understand what we had tried to destroy. We discovered a faith that did not need to shout to exist, a presence that did not impose itself, but offered itself. Months later, we came to the day that definitively marked our decision. For the first time, we received what we had previously profaned, not as a symbol, as a meeting. Kneeling in that same place, I understood that it was not me seeking God. He had always been there, waiting for me to stop fighting. Today my life is simple. Less recognition, less comfort, but more truth. My wife walked with me. Some friends returned, others did not. I learned that following the truth has a cost, but living without it costs much more. We continue to share this testimony not to win debates, but to reach hearts. If this story touched you in any way, write in the comments, Virgin Mary, guide me to Jesus, and also leave your intention. I will pray for you. Subscribe to the channel and share with someone who needs to hear this. Maybe you don't need to fall to your knees like I did. Maybe you just need to stop running away. The door remains open, I know, because it was there that I finally came home.